Okay, today I want to cover the basics of UVs. We'll get into shader stuff later, but what we want to do is put an image such as this on an object in our scene, and then I'll go through the steps of how we go about doing that. There's several ways of putting an image into 3ds Max. Got one video in there somewhere that describes it. What I do is I just drag an image in from wherever I can find it and throw it into my material editor. Like I said, I'll get into shaders later. 3ds Max has some similar shaders that we can use in different softwares, but essentially we're just going to use a standard, and then with the output of our texture we'll just throw it into our diffuse for right now. Let's double click on the ball and then double click on the banner. We'll go ahead and turn on it in viewport. That you can see is that red little slash on the banner. So what we want to do now is go ahead and place this material on an object. So if I build a box, essentially what's going to happen is that every face that we see here is going to represent the projection of the image. And I want to kind of go through the idea of what's happening here. A projection, just like a projector or television or screen on your computer / mobile device, whatever, is projecting an image, set of pixels out towards the viewer. And that's kind of what we want to do here when we actually apply this image to our object. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to double click on it. I got the object selected, and I'm going to go ahead and apply it to this. And so now you can see that this image has been applied to every face on this cube, and you can see that there's different kinds of distortion based on the actual shape and the proportions of the actual object. If I go into the scale mode, I'm just go ahead and go into the squash and stretch, go down to the Z, and it's going to basically squash everything into the X and Y as I scale down. And you can see how the distortions become even more relevant. Let's go ahead and change the scale to just a uniform, and I'll scale into the X. And you'll see that it just basically is fitting on the face. And it's not always proportioned the way we want it, and it doesn't always seem to show an accurate representation of our imagery. So what we can do is go to the basics. We'll go through the UVW map modifier, and that's a legacy map that modifier that talks about how we set up our UVs. Now going into the actual sub-object, go to the gizmo. Let's go ahead and move it. It is projecting on a planar projection, just like a screen, in the Z-axis, and you can see on the X and the Y-axis that we've got some real bad banding. So if I change this from a planar to a box, you can see basically the same situation that we had before I applied the UV maps. This is a 3D primitive, so the UVWs are already set automatically, but they are set pretty generically, and we'll show you that in a little bit. But first, let's just talk about how I can move my gizmo around and change the actual position and orientation of the mapping. So here I'm actually putting the mapping gizmo, which is just a 6-sided projection essentially, and just kind of playing around with the actual orientation of it. Let's go ahead and snap that to X, snap it to Y, see? So it's just rotating around basically on this axis. Let's undo all that real quick and kind of flatten it back out. We'll go ahead and center this on here, so hit fit, and that'll slap the actual gizmo onto the object. If it is a weird shape or weird size, we can hit fit, and that just kind of snaps it on here. If we want to change something, let's go back to planar real quick so we can see what this next step is actually doing. I'm going to slide this up in the actual Z-axis. It doesn't change the orientation of the Z and X, the X and Y. So let's go to bitmap fit, and we need to find that actual bitmap that we have. We can use any bitmap that we want, but what I want to do real quick is I'm going to take this path, copy it, I'm going to paste it into its naming slot, and let's go find out which image that was. It's a lot of numbers. Web-based image. Boop, boop. Go ahead and click that, and now you can see that the actual mapping gizmo is matched the proportions of the actual image and not just the shape of the geometry. So I scale in the X and Y uniformly, and we can make that image fit. Now the neat thing is if I needed this to be accurate in terms of how it represents the proportions of the image to the proportions of the box, I can use this as a nice little reference, go into the box and actually change certain aspects of it to make it fit. Alright, so we do things like that off and on when we're setting up our objects. So it's a really cool method to just keep things kind of proportioned and clean. Alright, so let's go down the line real quick. Let's change the cylindrical, and this is basically taking the map and wrapping it around a cylindrical shape. And if I rotate this, you'll see that I can shift where the image is located on the image. Alright, so there's this interesting little telltale that's even on it's on all gizmos, and that's that green line, and that's talking about where the edge of the map is from this point on. One direction or the other is going to tile planar. So here's that image. So if I go here, you can see what I'm talking about, how it tiles off of this corner, and that's the edge right there. This is representing the top, which we go to cylindrical. You'll see that there is a little tab right there. Spherical has the same thing. Spherical is just like a shrink wrap, or it's like taking the a square image and trying to make it wrap as a spherical shape. Same thing as a shrink wrap. There are two places that I use this map, and that's about it. And when I use it is for actually using it as a displacement. We'll get into that later. Box you've already seen. Face is basically what was happening already. It's just putting the UVs on each face independently. It is regardless of where I move the gizmo. And XYZ to UVW, I rarely use this. This is more like for using real-time, real life, real size type, real map objects, but I usually I never touch it. So let's go ahead and get this thing kind of squared away. And let's see what I want to do in the next video is talk about the UV unwrap, which is going to help further describe what's happening here. So I'll be right back. That's not Camtasia.